Drivers keep seeing the same figure on this road, a figure standing at the edge of the carriageway late at night in South Yorkshire. Some slow down thinking someone needs help, others swear it steps into the road right in front of them, but when they stop, there is never anyone there. Police have seen it, road workers have reported it, and for decades, the sightings have never stopped. On the northern edge of Sheffield, the Stocksbridge Bypass cuts through steep woodland and old industrial ground, a quiet stretch of modern road carrying drivers between Sheffield and the Pennine Valleys each night. Built during the 1980s to ease congestion through the town of Stocksbridge, the bypass follows a corridor long shaped by ironworks, railway lines and the older tracks that once crossed the valley. Yet soon after the road opened, motorists began describing encounters they struggled to explain. Figures seen beside the carriageway, shapes crossing headlights, and the unsettling sense of being watched. The road itself passes through a landscape with deep industrial roots. For generations the valley carried the sound of furnaces hammering steel and the constant movement of workers. Before the bypass existed, narrow roads wound between terraced houses and factory gates. The area was busy, crowded, and often dangerous during winter darkness or heavy fog. Accidents were not uncommon on the older routes through Stocksbridge. Lorries, buses, and shift workers travelled the same narrow roads, sometimes with tragic consequences. When the new bypass opened in 1989, it was welcomed as a practical solution. Traffic could finally pass around the town instead of through it. The road followed a quiet hillside route overlooking the valley. Woodland pressed close to the tarmac, broken only by scattered footpaths and remnants of earlier industrial works. For many drivers, it was simply another bypass. Yet within a few months, unusual reports began circulating among motorists who regularly travelled the road at night. Drivers described seeing figures standing beside the carriageway, where no pedestrian paths existed. Sometimes a single person, sometimes the outline of several shapes watching passing vehicles. In some cases the figures appeared suddenly in headlights, tall, dark silhouettes that seemed to step forward before vanishing as the vehicle approached. Most witnesses assumed fatigue or misjudged shadows. However, the same descriptions began appearing again and again, often from drivers who had never spoken to one another. Local taxi drivers were among the first to compare experiences. Many worked late shifts, travelling the bypass several times a night while collecting fares across Sheffield and Stocksbridge. Several reported seeing a tall figure near the roadside barrier. The shape resembled a man wearing a long coat, standing motionless as the vehicle passed. Yet when drivers slowed or turned back to check the verge, the road behind them appeared empty. No pedestrian, no movement, only silent woodland. One account described a figure standing directly beneath a roadside lamp. The driver assumed it was a pedestrian waiting for assistance or attempting to signal a passing vehicle. As the car approached, the figure appeared to step slowly toward the carriageway. The driver instinctively slowed, expecting the person to cross the road ahead. Instead, the shape dissolved within the glare of the headlights. The road ahead remained clear, leaving the driver searching the mirrors for someone who was no longer there. Other witnesses reported a different encounter entirely. A small shape seemed running across the road from woodland to the opposite verge. Drivers braked suddenly, fearing they had almost struck a pedestrian or animal. Yet when they stopped, nothing could be found along the roadside. No injured person, no animal tracks, and no sign of movement within the trees. Only the quiet hum of engines and wind through the dark hillside woodland. Among the most frequently reported sightings is the figure often described as a monk. A tall shape wearing what witnesses believe resembled a long hooded robe. Drivers say the figure appears near a particular section of the bypass, standing slightly above the road where the hillside rises steeply beyond the verge. The figure does not move towards vehicles or attempt to cross. Instead, it stands motionless, watching traffic pass before slowly fading into the darkness. Another presence described by motorists is far less human in appearance. Witnesses speak of a dark mass or crouched shape moving along the roadside embankment. Drivers often describe the shape as unusually large, sometimes compared to a dog or animal, though far bigger than anything expected in that area. The figure is usually glimpsed only for a moment in headlights, yet several witnesses insist the shape briefly ran alongside their vehicles before disappearing into woodland. These reports gradually reached local media during the 1990s. Newspapers began collecting stories from drivers who believed they had experienced something unusual on the bypass. Some accounts came from motorists travelling alone late at night. Others involved passengers who saw the same figure at the same moment. While many dismissed the sightings as imagination, the consistency of certain descriptions raised curiosity, particularly the reoccurring figure of the silent monk. Local folklore soon began searching for explanations within the valley's history. Older residents pointed towards centuries of settlement, industry, and hardship within the Stocksbridge area. Long before the bypass existed, the surrounding hills carried scattered farms and religious sites, places that gradually disappeared as industry expanded across the valley. Some believe the monk-like figure may connect to earlier monastic routes or religious travellers who once crossed these hills between Sheffield and the Pennine settlements. Others suggest the sightings may relate to the industrial past of the valley. Generations of workers lived and laboured in conditions that were often dangerous and unforgiving. The steel industry shaped Stocksbridge for more than a century. Furnaces burned day and night while workers travelled long distances between home and factory gates. Accidents, injuries and sudden death were not rare in the early years of heavy industry, tragedies that rarely left detailed records beyond local memory. Yet one theory links the sightings to the construction of the bypass itself. Large sections of hillside were cut away as engineers created the new road. During this work, earth-moving equipment exposed layers of older ground long undisturbed beneath the woodland and soil. Some locals believe the disturbance of these areas may have unsettled something connected to the valley's past, whatever that past might hold. Police officers stationed in the area occasionally received calls from concerned motorists, drivers reporting a pedestrian walking dangerously close to the bypass at night. Officers attending the scene often found nothing when they arrived. The roadside remained empty, with no one visible along the verge or embankment. In several cases, the description given by the drivers matched earlier reports, a tall dark figure standing alone near the same section of road. Taxi drivers remained among the most frequent witnesses. Many travelled the bypass repeatedly during late night shifts when traffic was light and the road almost silent. Some drivers described a powerful feeling of unease while approaching certain bends, a sudden awareness that something stood ahead, beyond the reach of headlights. Then the shape would appear briefly beside the road, visible only for a moment before dissolving back into shadow as the vehicle passed. A particularly unsettling report described a figure suddenly sitting in the back seat of a taxi. The driver glimpsed the shape in the rearview mirror. Startled, the driver turned to speak, assuming a passenger had entered unnoticed while the car slowed near the verge. But the seat behind him was empty, the mirror now reflecting nothing except darkness and the dim glow of distant headlights behind. Several witnesses claim the bypass feels unusually quiet compared with other roads. Sound seems absorbed by the surrounding woods and steep valley sides. On certain nights, drivers describe mist gathering quickly along the road, patches of fog drifting across the carriageway even when surrounding areas remain clear. Within these shifting veils of mist, shapes sometimes appear momentarily formed. Silhouettes created by light, shadow, and imagination working together. Skeptics argue that the bypass offers perfect conditions for misinterpretation. Isolated road sections, tired drivers, and moving headlights interacting with trees and roadside barriers. Human perception struggles when travelling at speed through darkness. Brief shadows can appear far more solid than they truly are. In such circumstances, the mind often fills gaps with familiar shapes, figures, animals, or people where none actually exist. Yet some witnesses remain convinced they encountered something beyond misidentified shadows. Their descriptions contain details difficult to explain through simple visual tricks. Several drivers describe clear clothing shapes, folds resembling robes, or the suggestion of a hood covering the figure's head. These details appear repeatedly within independent accounts, each witness unaware that the other had reported the same feature years earlier. The monk figure remains the most widely recognised presence linked to the bypass, its silent stance beside the road becoming almost legendary amongst local drivers. Stories circulate among taxi ranks and delivery drivers, warnings shared casually about the place where the figure is sometimes seen. Many drivers admit they glance towards that hillside each time they pass, half expecting to see the shape standing there again. Despite decades of sightings, no photograph or video has clearly captured the figure. The encounters remain brief, unpredictable, and rarely anticipated. Drivers usually notice the figure only at the last moment, appearing suddenly within the narrow beam of headlights. By the time someone considers stopping or turning around, the road behind them is already empty. Today, the Stocksbridge Bypass remains a normal working road. Commuters, lorries, and buses pass along it every day without incident. Yet after dark, the character of the road changes, traffic thins, and the woodland surrounding the carriageway grows quiet. It is during these quiet hours that most sightings have occurred, usually by drivers travelling alone beneath the glow of scattered streetlights. For some locals, the bypass has become part of modern Yorkshire folklore, a place where unexplained encounters are simply accepted as part of the road. Drivers share stories with curiosity rather than fear, each account adding another small piece to the mystery. Yet no explanation has ever settled the question of what people believe they have seen there. Perhaps the answer lies within human perception itself, the fragile boundary between shadow and recognition when travelling through darkness. Or perhaps the valley holds memories older than the road, echoes of lives once lived across these hills before modern traffic ever passed through. Whatever the explanation, the reports continue quietly across the years. Brief encounters described by drivers who never expected to see anything at all. A quiet road above the valley, woodland pressing close against the tarmac, headlights sweeping across the hillside as vehicles pass through the night. Somewhere behind the roadside barrier, a figure may still stand watching, silent, unmoving, waiting as each car approaches before fading once again into darkness. And for those who travel the Stocksbridge Bypass after midnight, the questions often linger long after the road disappears behind them.